She was born into wealth and privilege, the daughter of a media mogul. She moved effortlessly through the highest circles of society, from British aristocracy to American billionaires. She was charming, educated, connected. But beneath the sophisticated exterior was something far darker. This is the story of Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman accused of being Jeffrey Epstein's chief recruiter, organizer, and partner in one of the most disturbing criminal operations in modern history. This is how a socialite became one of the most hated women in America. Welcome back to the channel. If you've been following this series, you already know about Epstein's connections to Bill Clinton and Prince Andrew. But none of those relationships would have been possible without the woman we're discussing today. Ghislaine Maxwell was the connector, the facilitator, the face that made Epstein's operation seem legitimate. She provided access to British high society. She recruited young girls. And according to prosecutors and victims, she participated directly in the abuse. Over the next 20 minutes, we're going to trace Ghislaine Maxwell's life from her privileged upbringing to her conviction for sex trafficking. We'll examine her relationship with her father, Robert Maxwell, her mysterious connection to Jeffrey Epstein, the specific allegations made by victims, her time on the run, her capture, and the trial that finally brought her to justice. This isn't rumor or speculation. This is based on court testimony, legal documents, and investigative reporting. Hit that subscribe button because this story is darker than you can imagine. Let's begin. To understand Ghislaine Maxwell, you have to understand her father. Robert Maxwell was one of the most controversial figures in British business history, a Czech-born Holocaust survivor who built a massive media empire, served in British Parliament, and lived like a king before dying in mysterious circumstances that still raise questions today. Robert Maxwell was born Jan Ludwig Ho in 1923 in Czechoslovakia. When the Nazis invaded, most of his family was murdered in the Holocaust. He escaped, joined the British Army, fought in World War II, and eventually became a British citizen, changing his name to Robert Maxwell after the war. Maxwell built Pergamon Press into a major scientific publishing house, then expanded into newspapers, buying the Daily Mirror and other publications. By the 1980s, he was a billionaire with homes in London, Oxford, and New York. He had a yacht, private jets, and political connections at the highest levels. He was also ruthless, litigious, and accused of numerous financial improprieties. In November 1991, Robert Maxwell died after falling off his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, near the Canary Islands. His body was found floating in the Atlantic Ocean. The death was ruled an accidental drowning, but many suspected suicide or even murder within days of his death. It was discovered that Maxwell had stolen hundreds of millions of pounds from his company's pension funds to cover his debts. The media empire collapsed. The Maxwell family's reputation was destroyed, and Ghislaine Maxwell, who had been living a glamorous life in London as her father's favorite child, suddenly found herself on the other side of scandal. This context is crucial because it explains Ghislaine's psychology and her later relationship with Epstein. She had experienced ultimate privilege and then seen it all collapse. She was desperate to reclaim the lifestyle and status she had lost, and she was willing to do almost anything to achieve it. Ghislaine Maxwell was born December 25, 1961, in France, the youngest of 9 children in the Maxwell family. Named after her father's yacht, she grew up in a mansion in Oxford, attended elite schools, and earned a degree from Oxford University. She was her father's favorite, accompanying him to meetings and social events. Friends described her as charming, intelligent, and fiercely loyal to her family. After her father's death and the exposure of his financial crimes, Ghislaine moved to New York in the early 1990s, reportedly to escape the scandal and rebuild her life. In New York, she used her British accent, aristocratic connections, and social skills to integrate into Manhattan's elite social scene. She dated wealthy men, attended exclusive parties, and cultivated relationships with powerful people. It was during this period, in the early 1990s, that she met Jeffrey Epstein. The exact circumstances of their meeting remain unclear, with different accounts suggesting they were introduced through mutual friends in New York social circles. What is clear is that their relationship quickly became central to both of their lives. The nature of their relationship has been debated extensively. Were they romantic partners? Business associates? Accomplices? The answer appears to be all of the above at different times. By the mid-1990s, Ghislaine and Epstein were frequently seen together at social events in New York, Palm Beach, and London. They appeared to be a couple, though Epstein also had other romantic interests. What Ghislaine brought to the relationship was legitimacy and access. Her British aristocratic background, her father's connections, which she still maintained, and her social skills made Epstein more acceptable in elite circles. She introduced him to Prince Andrew and other members of British high society. She helped him cultivate the image of a philanthropist and intellectual rather than just a wealthy financier, what Epstein brought to. Ghislaine was equally important. He gave her back the lifestyle she had lost when her father died. Luxury travel, expensive homes, access to the ultra-wealthy, and a sense of purpose and identity. According to court documents and victim testimonies, Ghislaine also played a much darker role in Epstein's life. She allegedly became his chief recruiter, finding and grooming young girls who would be abused by Epstein and his associates. Multiple victims have described Ghislaine as the one who first approached them, offered them opportunities for work or travel, and gradually introduced them into Epstein's world of abuse. This is where the story becomes truly disturbing. According to testimony from multiple victims presented in court and in civil lawsuits, Ghislaine Maxwell developed a systematic approach to recruitment and grooming. She would identify vulnerable young girls, often from troubled backgrounds, often lacking strong family support, often in need of money. She would approach them in public places, at a school, at a spa, at Mar-a-Lago, where Epstein was a member. She would present herself as sophisticated, worldly, and friendly. She would offer opportunities, a job as a masseuse, a chance to travel, an introduction to important people who could help with their careers or education. Virginia Giuffre, whose allegations against Prince Andrew we discussed in the previous video, described her recruitment by Ghislaine in detail. Working as a locker room attendant at Mar-a-Lago at age 16, Virginia was approached by Ghislaine, who struck up a conversation and asked if she was interested in learning massage therapy. Ghislaine said she knew a wealthy man who was looking for a traveling masseuse and would pay well. The offer seemed legitimate coming from a sophisticated, well-dressed woman at an exclusive club. Virginia described her first encounter with Epstein at his Palm Beach mansion. Ghislaine was present, making everything seem normal and professional. But the massage quickly became sexual, with Ghislaine allegedly instructing Virginia on what Epstein liked and normalizing the inappropriate behavior. According to Virginia and other victims, this was Ghislaine's pattern. She would be present for the first encounters, providing a female presence that made young girls feel safer, while actually grooming them for abuse. Other victims have described similar experiences. Carolyn, who testified using only her first name during Maxwell's trial, said she was 14 when she was first brought to Epstein's house by another girl. She testified that Ghislaine Maxwell touched her breasts, hips, and buttocks and told her she had a great body for Epstein and his friends. The testimony from Carolyn and other victims painted a picture of Ghislaine as far more than a passive bystander. She allegedly participated directly in the abuse on some occasions, touching the young girls inappropriately and engaging in sexual activity in their presence. She organized the logistics of the operation, arranging travel, managing schedules, and ensuring a steady supply of girls for Epstein and his associates. She normalized and justified the abuse to the victims, telling them it was normal, that they should feel lucky to have such opportunities, and that they were helping a wealthy and important man. She also allegedly used psychological manipulation, alternating between being friendly and maternal one moment and cold and threatening the next. Several victims described being terrified of Ghislaine, believing she had connections to dangerous people and would ruin their lives if they spoke out. This pattern of behavior continued for years. From the mid-1990s through at least the mid-2000s, dozens of girls passed through Epstein's properties, many recruited or managed by Ghislaine Maxwell for years. Ghislaine lived a life of extraordinary privilege while allegedly facilitating horrific abuse. She lived in Epstein's properties, his Manhattan mansion, his Palm Beach estate, his ranch in New Mexico, and his private island in the Caribbean. She traveled the world on his private jet and attended elite social events with him. She maintained her connections to British high society, regularly visiting London and hosting Prince Andrew and other aristocrats. She presented herself as Epstein's sophisticated girlfriend or chief of staff, never arousing suspicion from the wealthy and powerful people in their circle, but there were always questions beneath the surface. How exactly did Epstein make his money? Why did he surround himself with so many young girls? What was really happening at his properties? Most people in their social circle chose not to ask these questions. The benefits of knowing Epstein, his wealth, his connections, his hospitality were too valuable to risk by investigating too closely. This willful blindness on the part of Epstein's and Maxwell's associates is itself part of the scandal. How many people suspected something was wrong but said nothing? How many people saw young girls at Epstein's properties and chose not to question why they were there? The first major crack in the facade came in 2005 when the parents of a 14-year-old girl reported to Palm Beach police that she had been molested at Epstein's mansion. The police investigation that followed revealed a pattern of abuse involving dozens of girls. In 2008, Epstein pleaded guilty to Florida state charges of procuring an underage girl for prostitution and soliciting a prostitute. He received an extraordinarily lenient sentence, just 13 months in county jail with work release privileges that allowed him to leave for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. This lenient sentence was the result of a controversial plea deal negotiated by then U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta, a deal that was widely criticized for protecting Epstein and potentially other powerful individuals involved in his network. Crucially, Ghislaine Maxwell was not charged in the 2008 case. Despite multiple victims naming her as a participant and facilitator, prosecutors focused only on Epstein. This decision to give Maxwell immunity was one of the most consequential mistakes in the entire case. It allowed her to continue her life freely for another 12 years. After Epstein's conviction, Ghislaine largely disappeared from public view. She sold her New York townhouse and was rarely photographed. Some reports placed her in the UK, others in France, and still others suggested she was moving between locations to avoid scrutiny. Her relationship with Epstein during this period remains unclear. Some believe they remained close associates despite his conviction. Others suggest she distanced herself while maintaining financial connections. What is certain is that she did not face any legal consequences for more than a decade after Epstein's 2008 conviction. Despite extensive evidence of her alleged involvement. In July 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested again, this time on federal charges of sex trafficking minors in Florida and New York. Federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York had investigated Epstein and gathered evidence from multiple victims. The new charges suggested Epstein would finally face serious prison time. But in August 2019, Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. His death was ruled a suicide by hanging, though the circumstances raised numerous questions and conspiracy theories that persist to this day. With Epstein dead, attention turned to Ghislaine Maxwell. Victims and their advocates demanded that she be investigated and prosecuted. The FBI made clear that their investigation was continuing and that other individuals involved in Epstein's network could face charges. Ghislaine went into hiding. After Epstein's death, she essentially vanished from public view. Tabloid media reported alleged sightings, having a burger at an In-N-Out in California, at a book event in New York, but her actual whereabouts remained unknown. For nearly a year, Ghislaine successfully evaded law enforcement. She had the resources, the international connections, and the experience to stay hidden. She reportedly moved between properties, used other people's names for purchases, and avoided any public appearances. Agents arrested Ghislaine Maxwell at a luxury property in Bradford, New Hampshire, where she had been hiding. The property was purchased through a limited liability company to disguise her ownership. Agents found her in the house with a man believed to be her husband, Scott Borgerson, whom she had secretly married in 2016, when arrested. Ghislaine had wrapped her cell phone in aluminum foil, apparently attempting to prevent it from being tracked, a technique that also raised questions about her level of sophistication in evading detection. She was charged with multiple federal crimes related to her alleged role in Epstein's sex trafficking operation. The indictment accused her of enticing and grooming minor girls to engage in illegal sex acts with Epstein, participating in some of the abuse herself, and lying under oath during previous civil litigation. Specifically, the charges included enticement of minors, sex trafficking of children, and perjury. The indictment covered alleged conduct from 1994 to 1997, focusing on 3 unnamed minor victims during that period. Additional charges were later added related to a 4th victim. Ghislaine pleaded not guilty to all charges. Her lawyers argued that she was being scapegoated for Epstein's crimes because he was no longer alive to face justice. They claimed she was being blamed simply because of her association with Epstein and that there was no evidence she participated in any criminal activity, but prosecutors and victims told a very different story. They described Ghislaine as an equal partner in Epstein's operation, not merely an associate. They presented evidence of her direct involvement in recruiting, grooming, and abusing minors. After her arrest, Ghislaine was held without bail at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. Her lawyers repeatedly requested bail, arguing that she was not a flight risk and that conditions in the jail were harsh, but judges denied these requests, citing the seriousness of the charges and the risk that she would flee. Ghislaine spent over a year and a half in custody awaiting trial, during which time she complained about the conditions and claimed she was being treated worse than other inmates. Due to the high-profile nature of her case, Ghislaine Maxwell's trial began in November 2021 in federal court in Manhattan. It was one of the most closely watched trials in recent American history, bringing together allegations of sex trafficking, abuse of power, and involvement of some of the world's most famous and powerful people. The prosecution's case rested heavily on the testimony of 4 women who described being abused by Epstein with Ghislaine's participation when they were minors. Their testimony was specific, consistent, and deeply disturbing. Jane, identified by a pseudonym, testified that she met Ghislaine and Epstein when she was 14 at a summer camp. Ghislaine befriended her, showed interest in her life, and gradually introduced her to Epstein. Jane testified that sexual abuse began shortly afterward, and that Ghislaine was sometimes present during the abuse and participated in it. She described Ghislaine as making the situation seem normal, telling her this was acceptable behavior and that she should feel fortunate to have such wealthy and connected people interested in her. Kate, using only her first name, testified that she met Ghislaine in Paris when she was 17. Ghislaine presented herself as a friend and mentor, introducing Kate to her friend Jeffrey Epstein. Kate described how Ghislaine normalized sexual activity with Epstein, telling her she would enjoy giving him massages and that he needed young women to do so. Carolyn, testifying using only her first name, provided perhaps the most damaging testimony. She described being 14 years old when she was first brought to Epstein's Palm Beach mansion. Carolyn testified that Ghislaine Maxwell touched her inappropriately, told her she had a great body for Epstein, and paid her hundreds of dollars after sexual encounters with Epstein. Carolyn broke down crying multiple times during her testimony, describing how the abuse destroyed her life, leading to drug addiction and ongoing psychological trauma. Annie Farmer, the only victim to testify using her full name, described meeting Ghislaine and Epstein when she was 16. She was invited to Epstein's New Mexico ranch under the pretense of discussing educational opportunities. She testified that Ghislaine gave her an inappropriate massage while she was topless and that Epstein also touched her inappropriately. The testimony from these 4 women was consistent on key points. Ghislaine presented herself as friendly and trustworthy. She facilitated access to Epstein. She normalized the abuse, and in some cases she participated directly. The defense strategy was to discredit the witnesses, suggesting their memories were unreliable after so many years. that they were motivated by potential civil lawsuit payouts from Epstein's estate, and that they were blaming Ghislaine for Epstein's crimes because he was no longer alive to face justice. The defense also attempted to portray Ghislaine as a victim herself, a woman manipulated and controlled by the powerful and wealthy Epstein. They suggested she had no knowledge of any illegal activity and was simply living in Epstein's orbit without criminal intent. The defense called character witnesses who described Ghislaine as kind, generous, and incapable of the crimes alleged. Her siblings testified on her behalf, describing a loving sister from a good family. But the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. In addition to victim testimony, they presented flight logs, photographs, and documents showing Ghislaine's integral role in Epstein's operation. They showed she managed his households, organized travel for young girls, and was present at properties when abuse occurred. They also presented evidence of Ghislaine's perjury, sworn testimony she had given in previous civil cases where she denied knowledge of Epstein's abuse of minors, testimony that was contradicted by the evidence and victim accounts. After nearly 4 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. On December 29, 2021, after deliberating for 5 days, the jury returned guilty verdicts on 5 of the 6 charges. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted of conspiracy to entice minors to travel to engage in illegal sex acts, conspiracy to transport minors with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, transporting a minor with the intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, and 2 counts of sex trafficking conspiracy and sex trafficking of a minor. She was acquitted on only 1 count, enticement of a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. The guilty verdicts meant Ghislaine faced decades in federal prison. The courtroom was silent as the verdicts were read. Ghislaine showed little emotion, though her family members were visibly upset. Victims who attended the trial expressed relief and vindication. Virginia Giuffre, who was not one of the 4 women who testified at trial, issued a statement saying, "I hope that today is not the end, but rather another step in justice being served." Maxwell did not act alone. Others must be held accountable. On June 28, 2022, Ghislaine Maxwell was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The sentence was less than the prosecution had requested, but still represented a significant victory for the victims and law enforcement. At her sentencing hearing, Ghislaine was given an opportunity to address the court. She expressed sympathy for the victims, but stopped short of taking full responsibility for her actions. She said, "It is the greatest regret of my life that I ever met Jeffrey Epstein. I believe that Jeffrey Epstein fooled all of those in his orbit. His death left many unanswered questions and his victims with no closure. I am sorry for the pain that you have experienced." Many observers found this statement inadequate and self-serving, as it portrayed her as another victim of Epstein rather than as an active participant in his crimes. Several victims gave impact statements at the sentencing hearing, describing the lifelong trauma caused by the abuse. Annie Farmer, speaking in court, said, "She has never shown any remorse for her heinous crimes. I ask the court to impose a substantial sentence that shows no one is above the law." The judge, Allison Nathan, noted the seriousness of the crimes and the lasting harm caused to the victims in imposing the 20-year sentence. With credit for time served and potential good behavior, Ghislaine will be eligible for release when she is approximately 79 years old. She is currently incarcerated at a low-security federal prison for women in Florida. She has filed appeals, challenging her conviction, arguing that the statute of limitations had expired on some charges, that pretrial publicity made a fair trial impossible, and that the non-prosecution agreement given to Epstein in 2008 should have applied to her as well. Legal experts generally believe these appeals are unlikely to succeed, but the legal process could continue for years. So what does the conviction of Ghislaine Maxwell mean? It represents a rare example of accountability for someone at the highest levels of wealth and privilege. For years, Ghislaine moved through elite social circles, protected by her connections and Epstein's wealth. She allegedly facilitated the abuse of dozens of young girls while living a life of luxury and privilege. Her conviction sends a message that such crimes will eventually face consequences, even if it takes decades, but many questions remain unanswered. Ghislaine Maxwell did not cooperate with prosecutors. She did not provide information about other individuals who may have participated in or benefited from Epstein's operation. The names in Epstein's Black Book, the wealthy and powerful men who visited his properties and flew on his jet, have largely avoided any legal consequences. Prince Andrew settled a civil lawsuit but faced no criminal charges. Bill Clinton has never been accused of any crimes related to Epstein. Dozens of other prominent men remain unexamined. This selective justice frustrates many victims and advocates. They ask why only Epstein and Maxwell have faced criminal consequences when the operation clearly involved and benefited many others. The answer likely lies in the difficulty of proving criminal intent and participation, the protection wealth provides through expensive lawyers, and the reluctance of prosecutors to take on the most powerful individuals without overwhelming evidence. Ghislaine Maxwell's story is ultimately about privilege, power, and predation. Born into wealth and connected to the highest levels of society, she allegedly used those advantages to facilitate horrific crimes against vulnerable children. She represented herself as a friend and mentor while actually being a predator and accomplice. Her conviction provides some justice for her victims, but it cannot undo the harm caused or answer all the questions about Epstein's network of abuse and the powerful people who enabled it. This is the third video in our series on Jeffrey Epstein's connections. Next, we're investigating the mysterious source of Epstein's wealth. How did a college dropout with no clear investment strategy accumulate billions of dollars? What were his real connections? And did he really belong to intelligence, as some have claimed? If you're finding value in these deep investigations, hit that subscribe button and like this video. Drop a comment. Do you think Ghislaine Maxwell was an equal partner in Epstein's crimes, or was she manipulated by him? Do you think justice has been served? Part 4 drops in 3 days. The mystery of Epstein's money and his alleged intelligence connections. This is where the story gets really dark. Share this video. These stories need to be told. I'm out. Stay vigilant.